Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name is Eileen Burke and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. Our lecture today is sponsored by Speedway Properties. Our speaker today is Jim McKee. Jim is a lifelong Lincolnite. His great-grandparents pioneered in Lancaster County in the 1870s. Jim has a bachelor's degree from UNL and operates J and L Lee Company, a publisher of regional books, as well as the Coinery, a stamp and bullion dealership. Jim has written over 1,500 articles and books on Lincoln and Nebraska history. He serves on the City of Lincoln Historic Preservation Commission and is also a founding member of the Preservation Association of Lincoln. This is the number 44 of a series of talks that we're completing, and it's Jim McKee's Complete History of Lincoln. Please join me in welcoming Jim McKee.
We need to revise that introduction. It's now 1,600.
Okay. Glad you know that.
Nobody does. Few people care. Today we're going to be talking about several things. Hillcrest Country Club, first among them. This is an early picture, certainly in the 1920s. We'll be talking about the Country Club of Lincoln a little bit later on, and they kind of overlap a little bit, not in their own histories, but the two, you'll get a little bit of a refresher when we get there, okay? Because in 1899, several gentlemen in Lincoln, among them was William Fitzgerald, who had a department store in Lincoln on O Street, and the Mayer brothers, who had a department store on O Street, and Carl Gunzel, who had a department store on O Street, decided to start a golf club in the city of Lincoln. They established a golf club which was pretty loose. It was called Pleasant View. I've also seen it called the Pleasant Hour. And it was located on the northwest corner of 27th and A. And if you have trouble envisioning that, it would be across the street west from the zoo, right across the street. Someplace on that corner, they had a clubhouse, which was probably just a small frame building. It was a cramped course, probably only 9 holes. We don't know very much about it. It went down 27th, clear to where today we would have the Sunken Gardens. At that time, 1899, the area that we think of as Sunken Gardens was pretty much a dump. And by that, I don't mean run down. I mean it was a dump where people would just drop off stuff and leave it there. There was a cul-de-sac, which later Antelope Creek was straightened out, and that left the Sunken Gardens as an area all itself. 1904, Governor David Butler's mansion, which is, we'll call it 7th and A. It was actually, the mansion itself was about a block or 2 blocks to the south of 7th and A streets. It was purchased and it became the Country Club of Lincoln. The relationship between the Pleasant View or Pleasant Hour and the Country Club of Lincoln is a little bit unclear. It had some of the same people involved in it, but it does not appear to be just a direct transaction to go over there. Then in 1922, the Country Club of Lincoln will move from 7th and A, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. At the same time, Eastridge Country Club opened. Eastridge Country Club was the third country club in Lincoln, also had an 18-hole course, had a swimming pool, a large building on 70th Street, and roughly it would be 70th and A towards the southeast from there. There's a major building there on the corner, an office building, and until they built that building, you could still see the green from the golf course, which sat right there, and certainly aerial views showed it very clearly. The swimming pool there stayed for quite a while, as did East Hills, the building, which became a supper club, if you will. The swimming pool lasted for a while, but slowly but surely, Hamptons developed all of that, and Hamptons put in that 3 or 4 story brick building on the corner. So Eastridge came at about the same time. 1918. Post-World War I, the Masonic Lodge and the Shriners Lodge were considering building a new country club or a downtown clubhouse. actually had 3 different proposals in mind, and they put it to their membership and as a vote. They voted on a suburban site, which would make it a country club. They had $70,000 saved up, and the $70,000 was all in Liberty bonds from World War I, so there was actually $70,000 easily. At that point in time, enter Mark Woods. Mark Woods, the Woods brothers, was the president of the Country Club of Lincoln, which I always want to call the Lincoln Country Club, but it is not, and they will correct me. It's the Country Club of Lincoln, CC of L. He offered the site of the old country club at 7th and A. Again, that's sort of a small or a general address to the Shrine Club, if they would come there, for $150,000. Obviously, they had $70,000. That would mean that if they were going to take it, they would have to come up with $80,000 or borrow it. They hemmed and they hawed, and Mr. Woods lowered the price to $80,000, which is very easily attainable, but they took another vote of the members, and they voted not to accept it, which probably turned out to be both wise and unwise at the same time. And at that time, the Shrine Club purchased 660 acres from a man by the name of Leavitt, Leavitt. The family also owned the land where today we have the Veterans Hospital. Leavitt family had several sections of land out there, and when the Leavitts sold that portion of the land to the Veterans Administration for the Veterans Hospital, the Leavitt farmstead, the house, went with the property and became sort of a building for the groundskeeper at the new hospital, Veterans Hospital. They then moved to Bethany. Their family was well known to our family, and I knew their son, who was a little bit younger than I, for example, and so forth. But the Leavitts also owned this 660 acres of land. Paid him $80,000, and it included another 80 acres of land, which is going to be parceled off a little bit later. In about 1928, they laid out, a professional golf course designer laid out a par 72 18-hole course, which pretty much still exists as it did then. Davison Wilson was then hired to design the building we see here. Olson Construction Company was the primary builder of the building. Moorish design, I don't know. Bob will probably give me a better detailed description than that, but I call it a Moorish design. This was only a small part of the design outside of the golf course. They also designed a picnic house, which was an 8-sided building, which would be just off O Street on the western edge of their property. We'll see pictures of that in just a moment. An 8-sided picnic house, they called it. A playground, which would have been down there. What that meant, I don't know. Tennis courts, which are going to go away and come back. A fishing lake, a 3-acre lake, which I've never been actually able to exactly pinpoint, but it would have been on this northwestern portion of their land at that point in time. Also a shooting range. They planned to build 2 more 9-hole golf courses west of the 18-hole course, but never happened. They also planned, but never built, baseball diamonds, a croquet lawn, a bowling green, and a wading pool. Those things, although planned, never came into fruition. By 1929, they had spent around $400,000. Golf course design, golf course production, the building itself had apartments, plural, on the second floor. I don't think that ever happened. There was definitely, when I was a kid, an apartment on the second floor where the manager of the club lived, and for a while even rented it out to a chap who worked downtown for either Ben Simons or McKee's, I'm not sure, and he lived there year round. Tower, 20-foot tower, 40 by 80-foot dining room, They had planned to build an additional dining room to the east. That was never built exactly, but the original plans flip-flopped a few of the things. If you've been in Hillcrest lately, you know the dining room is what I always like to call it the southeastern portion, but the building does not sit true to the compass, so it's a little hard to get your arms around, but that's what I would call it. Originally, that was to be the clubhouse or the pro shop, and it makes sense because that would have been where the first tee was and still is, but it was not. What's now the pro shop was, when I was a kid again, was a dining room, and if you go into the pro shop today, you'll notice on the what would be the sort of south end of the building, there's a large walk-in, if you will, fireplace, and that was part of the original dining room. What else? Charles Stewart and a number of people who were not members of the club donated things to get it started. Charles Stewart donated 10,000 fish for the 3-acre lake. Nebraska Game and Parks donated several pairs of pheasants for obvious reasons. 1934, the swimming pool was added and completed. During the Great Depression, they're going to lease the building out. Let's look at the next one. This building looks pretty much like this today. It's had a new addition, which brings it out to this front, which, if you look at it, you can tell instantly where the addition was because it's stucco over, I think, plywood or something instead of stucco over cement. This is a picture taken when the shrine had it. You probably recognize this guy right here. That's my grandfather. This chap right here. The others are primarily, as near as I can tell, businessmen, a lot of them from Havelock. And we're looking, of course, to the pool and the building from the eastern side. At that point in time, there were 3 diving boards, a high diving board and 2 diving boards, lower boards. The southernmost low board will be removed, and then ultimately when they build a new pool, the high board will be removed as well. Well, the Great Depression did the Shrine Club in, and one of the problems was at that time not so much money, but the fact that it was so blamed far from the city of Lincoln that people just found it hard to get out there, especially with gas difficulties. You know, it's probably 25 cents a gallon then, I don't know. But at any rate, they claimed that was one of their problems. People just didn't want to go that far out of the city. So what the Shrine did was they leased the club to another man who started what he called the Broadmoor Country Club, of which my father was also a member, not my grandfather, but my father. He was an individual, tried to run it as a profit. He didn't. It went bankrupt. And when it went bankrupt, one of the problems developed was that he literally stripped everything in the club that was saleable before he returned it to the Shrine. All of the plumbing, for example, was removed, so it was a shell, which meant they really had very little to work with. We step back, and everything is sold at a sheriff's sale. The first purchaser is the Federal Farm Loan Company. It is kind of a arm's length transaction, if you will. Dr. Bernie Gradwall and others, including my father, put together a new corporation called the East O Corporation. Their primary thought was to develop a country club which was not restricted, if you understand my meaning. This is one of the things they were seeking. At that point in time, Country Club of Lincoln was restricted. Okay, they wanted a new one. ESO Realty will acquire most, but not all, of the real estate. Certain portions of it will not be acquired by them, including the caretaker's house, which is on O Street, just as you enter on the southeast, where the drive goes in, and O Street, the southeast corner of that. That's a private property. They did not acquire it at that time. Other things were going on in the 20s and 30s. For example, there was oil exploration, and there was a well sunk to determine if there was oil on the property on what would be the southwest corner of the property, which would be right along A Street, between A and the railroad tracks right there. As far as I know, those wells are probably still there underneath the buildings which have come along, but was unsuccessful. There was no oil there at all. Some of the things which are intact, we'll see in just a minute, are there was between, I don't know that it has a name, but Hillcrest Drive, I'll call it, which is the road which connects O Street with the club, and the picnic grounds which were directly west of there. There was a creek which ran through there. The creek is no longer there, but the bridge, the concrete bridge, is still there, and it is still used as now a road which connects to the west to that new retirement community building which is there. Very, very clearly visible, sitting kind of in the middle of nowhere. Lots now, they were at 45,000, then they went to 50,000, and I think they're even above that now for the development around it, primarily to the south along A Street, land which was part of Hillcrest. They still call it Hillcrest, and Hillcrest owns the entrance. It's a very complicated little piece of real estate in there. And a few years ago, less than 10 years ago, the county came along and said, we already own the eastern edge of your property. It is a street. I can't think of what the number is, 98th or 100th, something right in there. And they are going to pave it. And one of the things that they came to us and the gentleman who owns all the property to the east, took a little bit from him and a little bit from Hillcrest, but they're not interfering with any of the greens or the fairways along there. So we came out real easy, and our attorney said, they worked out a deal which I thought maybe we were going to even be able to take advantage of, and they said that if they didn't start building that roadway in like 10 years, the property would revert to Easto Realty. But sadly, it looks like they're going to start developing it very quickly. 2023, we put in a new swimming pool. This is the old pool. Again, this time we're looking towards the southeast. We can see the two low boards and the high board. These pictures were taken by the Cushman Motor Works for an advertisement that they did. So it wasn't normal to see people driving Cushman vehicles around the pool. This is the 8-sided picnic house, if you will. It stood not quite a block south of O Street and just to the west of where that new retirement home is. Here it has been enclosed, and it became a private residence in the latter part of its life. Still interior looked like that 8-sided house, picnic house, and the fireplace was in the middle. Just as it always has been. It is now gone, and as they built huge new houses around it and just tore it down and moved on from there. Next, we'll be talking a little bit about the governor's mansion. And this is, let's see. And Gordon, I admit, I've had them everything in line, but I move things around a little bit in my cards, not the pictures, so I have to get my notes back for the governor's mansion. The governor's mansion has kind of two parts to it, and part of it we'll do today, and then part of it we'll do if there's time at the end, or we'll move it to next time. The Butler Mansion. In 1867, when the Capitol Commission was formed with 3 members to investigate and move the territorial capital, which had been in Omaha City, to a new spot, long story which we've covered before and may look at again at some point, but at any rate, the 3-person Capitol Commission chose the city of Lancaster to be the basis of the city. Capitol building would be built on the highest buildable point of land. And an interesting thing that had occurred at that point in time, there was a law which forbade, well, I say a law, but there was a statement which the legislature said the Capitol Commission were not allowed to purchase lots in the city of Lincoln at the state auction sale. Their fear was that it would appear to be that they were driving the sale or that they would be taking advantage of people. So they were not allowed to buy lots. And the first day of the auction sale in Lincoln, which was to get funds to operate the state of Nebraska when they went from being a territory to becoming a state, because as a territory, literally 100% of the expenses of operating the territory were paid by the federal government, who also appointed the governor. So one of the things when we moved from territoryhood to statehood, we suddenly will have a need for money, which means taxes or sale of land, which the federal government had transferred to the territory of Nebraska. So that's what the auction sale is for, to raise money, principally to build the Capitol building, to operate the state, later to fund the building of the University of Nebraska, the state penitentiary, and our old friend, the State Regional Center as well. So that's what the auction was for. And the first day of sales in Lincoln, it's going to go from Lincoln to other cities and then back to Lincoln on a rotation basis until enough lots are sold that they can afford to at least start the Capitol building. The first day of sales was miserable. Just literally nothing sold. In fact, the first lot went for, they said $40, but in fact what it sold was $40 above the minimum established for the lots. But at any rate, just literally nothing happened the first day. So the Capitol Commission got together and they took some direction from some people in Nebraska City, probably Mr. Sweet, who was going to become the first state treasurer, and others who said, if you do not buy lots at the auction sale and show your confidence in this, what some people in Omaha thought was a harebrained scheme to move the capital out of Omaha to a place which had a population of someplace between 13 and 30 people, it will fail. So each one of the Capitol Commission members did buy lots at the sale. Mr. Kennard and Mr. Gillespie will pretty much split the block catty-corner from the Capitol building to the southeast, where the Kennard house sits now still to this day. Governor Butler will acquire pretty much the block where the governor's mansion sits today. And I say acquire because although he said he bought it, when we scratch below the surface, it's unclear that any money ever changed hands, that he actually bought it. I don't know. There's somebody's doctoral thesis waiting to happen. But at any rate, he does not build on that property. Mr. Kennard and Mr. Gillespie will build sort of back-to-back houses. The Gillespie house will sit to the east of the Kennard house on that same block. But Governor Butler does not build on his half or his lot, which is where the governor's mansion sits now. Instead, he builds his house at roughly 7th and A Streets on 120 acres of land. And it ran, in general terms, let's say from 9th Street to Gooch's Mill, from A Street to South Street, just in general. It's an irregular shaped lot, so we won't worry about it. The architect for all three, and I'll use the word mansions, was a man by the name of John Keyes Winchell, who was a very young man, an architect at that time. The contractor for most of this will be Joseph Ward, who also will become the contractor for the Capitol building. It was said that all three mansions together cost about $15,000. And I just spent way more than that for a car and didn't get nearly enough. Well, Butler Mr. Kennard will be the first to occupy his property, and until he moves into the Kennard house, he will actually live in the Capitol building with his family. Just exactly where is not clear, but he occupied for a while in the Capitol building. Don't know exactly where. Anyway, he moves into the house early on, and it today is, depending on how you define it, the oldest residence building in the city of Lincoln. There might, if you want to stretch the definition, the Hudson Cabin, which is it still in the city of Lincoln? Well, it's in Pioneer Park, but it would precede that. But it's just a log cabin, more or less. So in a way, we have the first house built, owned by the State Historical Society, who was not really eager to keep it. So if you're looking for a new house, you might want to investigate that. Well, unfortunately, Governor Butler, after he is reelected, is offered a singular distinction, and he's impeached and removed from office, and he returns to his home. And the house then at 7th and A Streets is purchased by a man who himself has given himself the title of Lord. He calls himself Lord Earl Jones. Apparently, he just made it up, the Lord part, and nobody questioned it. He was known as Lord Earl Jones. He raised cattle, on the land that had been the golf course. He called his home Camden Hall, for what reasons I have no idea. Then in 1903, we talked about the Pleasant View 9-hole course on A Street. They are then going to reorganize or reform a new corporation, the Country Club of Lincoln, and they will then acquire the building down on 7th and A Streets. They will build a veranda around the house. Interestingly enough, the old golf course will provide maybe the first airfield or landing strip in the city of Lincoln. Again, definitional problems here, but in 1920, Mrs. Emily Roach is elected to deliver our electoral votes to Washington, D.C., 18 votes, and she decided she will fly, which will be it'll be unusual because it will be a woman delivering the votes. It will be unusual because she will fly. She finally takes off. I think she makes it with one stop, she makes it as far as Des Moines, and then the weather closes. So she's unable to get all the way. But it has become a very early airfield in the city of Lincoln. 1913, it'll acquire an additional 13 acres of land. Then in 1921, and I brought some show and tell up here for you to look at afterwards, the Ku Klux Klan will acquire the property. Interesting. 1921. It becomes the state headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan. I have misspoken myself already. They form in 1921. They acquire the property in 1923, 1924, and erect on that property an 8-foot tall electric illuminated cross, which stood and was beside the building for many, many years afterwards. We then have an interesting thing happen as the country club forms. We want to talk about that a little bit later on, so we'll leave that for a minute. And the governor's mansion. Let's see what's next here. Okay, the governor's mansion. When the state of Nebraska, which does not at that point in time have a governor's mansion, we have a man in Lincoln by the name of Mr. Thompson, who is a friend of Teddy Roosevelt, who becomes president of the United States. But in order to be elected president, one of the things our friend in Lincoln does is he will start a newspaper in Lincoln called the Lincoln Star. Mr. Thompson will start the Lincoln Star, 1902, whose only objective is to elect Teddy Roosevelt. It works. And after he is elected, Roosevelt appoints Mr. Thompson as ambassador to Brazil, and he then offers his home, which sat just to the east of the present governor's mansion. He offers it to the state of Nebraska to be used as a governor's mansion. The exact dollar amount is gone. It's here someplace, and I can't remember. But at any rate, the haggling starts at that point in time, and he offers it for a set figure, I believe $25,000. Where's that number? There it is. He offers it to the state of Nebraska for $25,000. And we say, let the dickering begin. And the state starts dickering with him and ultimately pays him $21,385. Governor Sheldon feared that by living in the house, he was receiving compensation, which would not be legal, extra compensation. So what does Sheldon do? An interesting thing. He asks the Attorney General of Nebraska to sue him. to answer the question whether it is additional income. The Nebraska Supreme Court says, no, it is not additional income. Therefore, he can own it and reside in it. 1919, Governor Sam McKelvey asked permission to not live in the governor's mansion. He has a very large, beautiful house on the northeast corner of 26th and N, and he asks for permission to stay there, which is granted. The Supreme Court enters this picture again and says that the governor does not have to live in the mansion. The last governor to live in the house was Governor Victor Anderson, and while he lived there, the state fire marshal entered the picture and first of all said the ballroom on the top floor was condemned. It couldn't be used because there was one staircase up apparently and no way back down. And secondly, Betty was not allowed to light the furnace, which means she can't occupy it. So they moved back to their home in Havelock. The house is going to be raised, and at that point in time, when you come up, take a look at this afterwards, because as they tear down the old mansion, parts of it will be salvaged, including the stairway, and Victor Anderson will cause a number of, I don't know how many, gavels to be made out of it. And this is a letter stating that that's where this came from. Also, when Governor Anderson moved back to the new mansion, he will use the same key to open the same lock that he used when he left the old building, because the striker mechanism was moved over to the new building. The new Summer Solheim designed building, looking from the Capitol building towards the south here. 31 room, 12 bath building. 1997, it was renovated, elevator was put in, sprinklers were added, and shortly after that it was put on the National Register of Historic Places. And Gordon, I'm sorry, I decided not to use this picture, so there you go. Now we'll talk about the Lincoln City Libraries. I called this program Lincoln's 2 or 5 or 8 Carnegie Libraries, and we'll see why there are so many. This is the original building. In 1867, the first Lincoln Library opened. It wasn't exactly a city library, it was actually 2 libraries. The Young Men's Library, another institution was the Young Ladies Library, 2 separate institutions. 1867, the same year that Lincoln became the capital. 1875, they saw the wisdom in putting them together, and they formed what was known as the Lincoln Public Library and Reading Room Association. That time, of course, they're going to catalog the total number of books after the 2 libraries are combined. They have 376 books. That number is going to become interesting in a minute. 376 books. 1877, 2 years later, the mayor of the city of Lincoln is a man by the name of R.D. Silver. We know Mr. Silver because he's the guy that built the first University of Nebraska building. Same guy becomes the mayor of the city of Lincoln. The council, and that not called that at that time, they decide that the city should provide funds to the library. But Mayor Silver, in his infinite wisdom, vetoes it. He said it would only lead to other, quote, foolish expenditures, end of quote. So he vetoes it. Along comes the next mayor, H.W. Hardy, and Mr. Hardy is the same guy that had Hardy Furniture. He engineers a $100 gift to the library, making it truly a public library and owned by the city of Lincoln. But if you wanted to check out a book, you still had to buy a membership, which was $1 a year. In the 1890s, they moved from rental to rental rooms, and then in the 1890s, they will lease the second floor of the Masonic Temple, which is on the northeast corner of 11th and M. This would put it on the western edge of St. Paul Methodist Church today. That's where the Masonic Temple was. Then, September the 16th, in the morning, a fire broke out in a building which was between St. Paul Church and the Masonic Temple, which was Jacob North's printing plant. It's said that a man was sitting in front of the fire station, which was directly down the alley to the west behind the Masonic Temple, and he saw a ball of flame blow out of the back of Jacob North, an explosion, literally. And it caught Jacob North on fire, burned it to the ground. Masonic Temple, pretty much burned it to the ground. In the meantime, however, St. Paul Methodist Church was fireproof. It was a stone building, no problem. The fire department ignored it. It's safe, right? Well, what they forgot was there are rafters coming down from the roof of the building, which are exposed on the ends towards the Jacob North building. The rafters catch on fire. The fire goes up into the rafters, down inside the building. So while they're putting out the fire in the other buildings, St. Paul burns down, literally too, from the inside out. The shell is there, but for all intents and purposes, it burns down. Now, at this point in time, the city library has only books in its possession that are checked out. If it's checked out in your house, that's the books it has. So, quick like, they count how many books are checked out, and it's hard to believe. But how many books were checked out that night? They said 376. A great coincidence, if true, and if true, it's a great story anyway, even if it isn't quite true. But that's what they said, 376 books. They moved the library then to the Lansing Theater building, which later will be the site of the Varsity Theater, and today will be the north end of the whatever bank it is, Union Bank, I think, the old National Bank of Commerce building. Okay, Mrs. William Jennings Bryan enters the picture, and she decides Lincoln should have one of them Carnegie libraries. So she writes to Mr. Carnegie and apparently receives no reply instantly. So Bryan heads to Washington, D.C., to Washington, I think, or New York, wherever Carnegie was at that time, and visits him in person. And learns that, first of all, the city has to own the real estate underneath it. It has to be a city library so that he can be assured that if he puts any money into it, that it will be an ongoing project. And he said he never funds any library in total. He wants the city to have an invested interest in it. So what's set up is a matching grant, sort of a challenge grant, if you will. He will grant $77,000 if the city can bring in $10,000, which they do. They find the property they want and purchase this. 1900, the groundbreaking occurs. The building is completed, and it has a capacity of 33,000 books on its shelves. This is looking towards the northeast, and the picture which was used on the postcard is the back of the building. I purposely used that because I thought nobody would recognize it. And it faced towards the southwest, that picture. 1909, the new branch will open, 27th and Orchard, and it's called the Northeast Branch of the Lincoln City Library. It is in the city. 1909 it opened. It started in a grocery store at 27th and Holdridge, believe it or not, when they had a little library, a small library there where for a few cents a day you literally rented the book, more or less. You didn't check it out and then pay a fine if you didn't get it. You paid an actual rental. That building that we see here will be picked up and moved in 1982 and becomes the nucleus of the Matt Talbot Kitchen. This is the Havelock branch, which was built in 1907 on land donated to the city of Havelock by Dr. Ballard. Ballard Avenue is named for him. Dr. Ballard was the first, probably they didn't call him this, but he was the first mayor of the city of Havelock, and he was the physician for the Burlington Railroad. 1907, he gave the land, which was on the extreme north end of Havelock Park, which he also gave. It closed in 1971 when Anderson Branch Library was built. This building was torn down and became part of Havelock Park. It's interesting too because Havelock was able to instantly raise their matching grant, while in the meantime Lincoln had to go back and ask for additional funds from Mr. Carnegie twice. But Havelock raised it all themselves. This is the College View branch, which was 1915. Originally, the College View Library was in the grocery store, which is on the northwest corner of Prescott and 48th Street, in the back of a grocery store. Sadly, it was there less than a year and it burned to the ground. The grocery store did. So Mr. Nicola, who owned the building, built a new building on the site, put a new library in, and guess what? Hey, burned that sucker to the ground too. And they then went in 1915 and got money to build a branch library of their city, not the city of Lincoln, but the city of College View, directly across the street on the extreme southwest edge of the campus of Union College, with the codicil that if the building were no longer used as a public library, it and the property underneath it would revert to Union College, which they did. It became the headquarters of KUCV Radio, KUCV, Union College, and it's still KUCV. Next branch, I get a little confused. I think this is probably the University Place branch, which was built in 1917 and closed in 1917. It became a private business and still is a private business. What are we doing here? We've gotten out of our sphere a little bit here. We've covered the Carnegie Library downtown, the Northeast Branch, which is the city library, Havelock, the College View, and the University Place Library. So why did I say that there were two Carnegie libraries? Well, because really only two, the Lincoln and the Northeast Branch. Why could there be five? Well, because each of the suburbs, when their Carnegie libraries came into Lincoln by annexation, there were five. So how could there be eight? Well, simple. There still is a Lincoln Public Library in Lincoln, Kansas. There is a Carnegie Lincoln Public Library in Lincoln, California. And there is a Lincoln Public Library, Carnegie, in Lincoln, Illinois. So 2, 5, or 8, your choice. Ultimately, there were 69 Carnegie libraries built in the state of Nebraska. 20 of them, at the last count, and they may have dropped from that now, 20 of them are still public libraries. Okay, now we can move on. Bethany. Now we're going to look at some bank. This is the Bethany Business District. We're looking at the west side of the street. And the building we want to talk about right now still stands. This little brick building right here. Still there. The last time I knew, it had fortune teller and something like that in a rather bizarre business. All the other buildings that we see here are gone. This is one of the two trolley cars which served the city of Bethany Heights, as it was originally known. At this point in time, there are two Bethanys. There's North Bethany and what I call regular Bethany, two separate business districts, equidistant on Cotner Boulevard from the entrance to Nebraska Christian University, which becomes, after the Depression, Cotner College, then Cotner University, then Cotner College, which technically then moved over onto Holdridge Street, and then technically moved down on our street across the street from Love Library, then moved over on about 20th and B Streets, and still exists, believe it or not. And I don't even know where it has a building now, but it's all outreach. They really don't have any use for a building. So if you get somebody saying they want a donation to Cotner College, it actually still exists. And probably 10 or 15 years ago, they told me they were, at that point in time, serving more students through whatever they did than they ever did when they had the building out in Bethany. So this is the beginning of the Bethany State Bank. 1895, what first was called the State Bank of Bethany, opened right there by a man by the name of Mr. Fuller, who was a grain dealer in Bethany. Then in 1905, he reorganized it as the First State Bank of Bethany, with $10,000 in capital, $60,000 worth of deposits. 1914, along comes a young man from Denton who becomes a cashier in the bank. His name was George Frampton, which we'll see again in a minute, because in 1960, he will establish Cornhusker Bank. 1914, they will move to the right in this picture, and they will occupy a new building. Let's see, here's a little bit better picture of the little brick building. It's a blow up, so it isn't very good, but it's still there, and if you drive down through South Bethany, or Bethany as we think of it, North Bethany is almost all now disappeared. But originally there were just as many businesses in North Bethany as there were in South Bethany. The post office was in North Bethany, for example. The lumberyard, there were actually lumberyards in both of them, but North Bethany has just sort of slowly deteriorated away. There isn't much down there anymore. 1914, they will buy the southwest corner of Saunders and Fairfield. Fairfield becomes Fairfax. Saunders becomes North Cotner Boulevard. That building is still there. It looks like this today. The bank will move into there in 1914. And that year, both this bank and the Havelock Bank were robbed. Probably by the same guy, literally on the same day, and they caught him. The bank closed during the Great Depression. The city of Lincoln will acquire it, and when I was a kid and I grew up, that was the Bethany Branch Library, until the new Bethany Branch Library was built on the extreme southwest corner of the Cotner College campus, and this becomes, first of all, a sort of a bakery, and now it's a hair salon, and I'm not sure that it still is that. Now they've also taken over the old house across the way, and there's a bank over there as well, the Chambers House. In 1987, they acquired it, the house which had been purchased by Citizens State Bank, and they opened a branch in there, and that bank was opened by a young lady by the name of Alice Frampton Dittman, who became the president of the bank. She was the daughter of George. Next, we're going to go to the bank in University Place. In 1891, a man by the name of LeGrand Baldwin and his partner, a man by the name of Pitcher, put together what was called the Baldwin-Pitcher Tract, a 44-acre tract of land, which ends up being the campus of Nebraska Wesleyan University in the 1880s. They will establish the Wyndham, and I don't know where the name came from, the Wyndham Bank on the corner of Warren and Miller Streets, or 48th and Madison. It still stands there on the northwest corner of the intersection. Last I knew, there was a restaurant in there. They had a capitalization of $25,000. 1895, the president of the bank was a man by the name of C.M. Ellinwood, Ellinwood, who was a professor at Nebraska Wesleyan, and he was also the treasurer of Nebraska Wesleyan, and he was also having some financial difficulties, which, of course, did him in. He was even the acting president of Wesleyan for a while. Ultimately, he will have to sell his stock. He's going to give all the proceeds to Wesleyan to try and make up for the money that he has somehow misappropriated. But he leaves town, and that's about it. 1905, the First National Bank of University Place was established and absorbed the Wyndham Bank in this location. Then in 1913, they moved to the northwest corner of 48th and St. Paul, more or less a couple blocks to the north of this, and to the southwest of the library branch out there. 1926, that bank was closed for incompetent management, which an awful lot of banks during the Great Depression closed, and incompetent management was kind of one of the catch-alls. 1905, Citizens State Bank will start up. This is the bank down on the corner, and you will recognize that as where Green's Plumbing and Furnace ended up ultimately. 1910, they're going to acquire this property. 1920, the Knights will begin to buy Citizens State Bank stock, and Citizen State's going to be moving into this building. 1982, Gene Tallman and Paul Shore III will buy the primary interest in Citizen State Bank. Then in 1986, Citizen State Bank, Gateway Bank, and Lincoln Bank South merge and become Vistar Bank. And it's about this time banks start changing their name and merging and going in and out of business to the point where it becomes mind-boggling. 1992, Norwest Bank acquired Vistar. 1998, Norwest merged into Wells Fargo, and I guess Wells Fargo is still going. So in 2003, this building became Green's Plumbing. Unfortunately, Green's moved in, and they're going to start buying buildings up and down beside them on the corner. And then, January 16th of 2003, that building burns to the ground, sadly. Now it's empty lots. We have reached the end of our time frame, so we can't really finish up the 3 banks I wanted to do. We'll have to come back to them a little bit later on. Afterwards, if you want to come up, you can see some Ku Klux Klan memorabilia that I have from when they operated out of the governor's mansion on 7th and 8th Streets. They were there for only a few years. The Ku Klux Klan became very popular in the United States. It started right after the Civil War, went out of business, and started again a few years later. It still exists today. This is stuff from the 1930s, and it lasted only a few years in Lincoln and quickly went out of business. So if there are any questions, we can do those. Otherwise, I think we have pretty much reached the end of our cable. Any questions on the floor?
I missed, what intersection is that again?
This intersection would be the southwest corner. Well, do you know where what the old Wesleyan Hospital building is? No. Okay. Well, it is an empty lot now. It's the north end of the business district on the west side of University Place. And the city of Lincoln, bless their hearts, if they could have engineered a way to drive University Place Business District out of business, they couldn't have come up with a better plan than they did. They have literally wiped out the business district. They closed it for like 2 years to widen the street. They increased it, no parking. They increased the speed limit along there, and literally all of the buildings have gone out of business. So sad to say. But anything else? A question? Or did I answer that question adequately? The southwest corner of 48th and what would it be? St. Paul, I think.
Okay.
I'm not sure about that.
Madison.
I'm not sure.
Madison.
Anybody know the answer? Is it St. Paul? Oh, well, there's Ed. What is it? Madison. Okay, Madison. St. Paul is the corner where we were talking a minute ago, where this bank, this is St. Paul, right? And this little building right here, which was added and was an appurtenance to the bank and owned and operated by the bank, up until about 10 years ago, there was a number on the door, and it was the number of the old street numbering system. Because the numbers went off of 48th Street. And they had it left, and I told them to leave it up there, but they paid no attention to it. So, okay, if not, I think that brings us pretty much to the end. And afterwards, come up and take a look, okay?